Does mental disorders distort sensory perceptions? Mental disorders are defined as a behavioral or mental pattern that causes significant distress or impairment of personal functioning. Sensory perception is defined as how one perceives their senses, such as hearing, vision, taste, smell, or touch. These two words are related as mental disorders can distort your sensory perception. Some of the most common mental disorders are schizophrenia, bipolar, and depression. Mental disorders weren't heavily focused on until the early 20th century. This was due to the fact that people with mental disorders were often seen as crazy or affiliated with the devil. According to Human Diseases and Conditions, along with psychiatry, other fields that involve the studying of the brain and nervous system increased a lot in this time. This resulted in studying whether or not psychological problems could be related to psychological states. An example of when you're stressed and you experience physical symptoms such as difficulty sleeping, loss of appetite, and more. Fast forward a century, and now people are more educated on mental disorders, and research has expanded a lot, and there are abundance of facilities that focus on the mentally ill. Mental disorders are even being brought to attention in children's books, such as Through the Looking Glass by Lewis Carroll. When children read this book, they see a young girl named Alice who travels to an alternate universe, but she meets unique people. But with further investigation, you can see that Alice shows signs of the commonly known mental disorder schizophrenia. Signs such as not being able to differentiate between the alternate universe and the real world, seeing things that weren't there, and believing that she lived in the backwards world can all relate to symptoms that people with schizophrenia have. This can relate by showing people what it's like to have a mental disorder that alters sensory perception. Sensory perception that are altered can also be seen in mental disorders such as schizophrenia. According to Human Diseases and Conditions, which is a well-known dictionary for illnesses, this disorder can affect 1.5 million people, and visual perceptions are altered and can cause hallucinations and illusions. People can also have altered auditory perceptions, where they hear voices that aren't really there. Therefore, schizophrenia causes people to have a distorted reality because of their askewed sensory perception. Furthermore, bipolar disorder is another mental disorder that affects 5.7 million people. According to Deborah Ward, a highly known author and psychologist, people with bipolar disorder can feel like the world is overstimulating them. Their perception constantly changes as they go between their manic and depressive state. According to Dr. Tamsin Van Reen, the part of the brain where the five senses are can't communicate efficiently, causing their senses to be distorted. Dr. Reen also conducted an experiment where they showed how people with bipolar disorder had trouble reading people's facial and vocal expression. But people without bipolar disorder could read it good. Finally, depression affects 350 million people worldwide. An author named John Anson shares his vulnerable story of what it's like to live with depression. He shares how depressed people live life with a pessimistic lens. He says how everything he views is distorted because it's not actually what it seems. In result, people with mental disorders should take medication that specifically help with their problem and can lessen the distortion of their sensory perception. For example, the #1 ranked hospital in the nation, Mayo Clinic, suggests that antipsychotic medicine such as Latuda is the most commonly effective solution for schizophrenia. For depression, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors are the most effective in common medicine. Finally, for bipolar disorder, it is the best to stay away from antidepressants because that could trigger a manic episode. Instead, they should use mood stabilizers such as tretinoin and Epital, which are good medications. Some limitations can arise for the solution. For example, there are specific medicines for specific illnesses. A medication for ADHD will not lessen the distortion of sensory perception with someone who has schizophrenia. Likewise, a medicine medication that might work for one person with schizophrenia might not work for another. There's also the huge risk of side effects that could range from mild to severe. For example, some side effects of Xanax include dizziness, vomiting, sweating and swelling, and blurred vision, and more. There is also the huge risk of overdosing on any of these medications and dying. A common counter-argument would state that mental disorders do not alter sensory perceptions. Nonetheless, people like Arthur from the stimulus source believe that eyewitnesses and outside sources could alter your perception are inferior to the thesis. One's perception and their ability to convey whatever events they may have seen are two completely different things. Take, for example, schizophrenia, which is one with such disease might be able to recognize and analyze everyday perception, but their ability to translate those events into words or actions could be altered. Even the Supreme Court of the United States recognizes this, as people with certain disorders are protected under the Fifth Amendment and can't incriminate themselves. There are countless perspectives that are relevant to the topic. An example of one relationship is between a psychologist and a psychiatrist. A psychologist would examine a patient through a biopsychosocial lens and discover that they have a disorder that causes their sensory perceptions to be altered. A psychiatrist would spend a lot of time diagnosing of mental disorders and could determine the difference between a person without mental disorder and a person with one by knowing the sensory perceptions can be distorted. A psychologist and a psychiatrist share an agreeing relationship where they approve of the thesis. Another example of perspectives share a relationship between a person with no mental disorder and a person with schizophrenia. The person with no mental disorder does not know firsthand what it's like to have a distortion of sensory perception. Therefore, it can argue that mental illnesses do not cause a distortion. On the other hand, a person with schizophrenia experiences hallucinations through the auditory and visual sensory perceptions and knows no other way of living. Therefore, these two perspectives share a disagreeing relationship where the person with no mental disorders would disagree with the thesis and the person with schizophrenia would agree. Okay, that's all.
All right. Let's take a look at the defense questions. You brought up a few different mental illnesses and the different effects that has on perception. When those mental illnesses and the misperceptions that come from them are left unaddressed, what are some of the negative effects for the individual and for society as a whole that you came across in your research? So these people have mental illness, the misperceptions that come from them. What are the costs for that person and for society?
Well, they could, like, for example, a person with schizophrenia, they could have hallucinations and illusions. Like, maybe they're in school and they start, like, talking to themselves, or, like, they, like, hear voices or see things, and that could cause, like, other people trouble, and they might be, like, confused and, like, they don't know what they're talking about.
Okay. And regarding your solution, there's recently been a movement amongst some people who we traditionally call mentally ill, who kind of reject traditional treatment and that traditional characterization and medications. They just, for whatever reason, don't like taking them, don't like the idea of being classified as mentally ill, all that kind of stuff. Would you support a solution that mandated people with schizophrenia or bipolarity have to take their medication under some sort of supervision, or would you not support that, and why? Let me rephrase that. Would you support mandatory supervised medication intake for people with schizophrenia and bipolarity or not, and why would you support or not support that kind of policy?
I think I would say that they have to take their medications just because their hallucinations and illusions could cause them to potentially maybe kill themselves, and they might not know any better. So if they take their medications, it could lessen their hallucinations and help them get
All right. Excellent job, Super Sophie.